All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Dr. Cheryl Meyer, and I'm reading The Princess and the Curdie. And you can join here or start at the beginning. It's fine to join here. George MacDonald is a man that C.S. Lewis said every single one of his books he's quoting from George MacDonald. Either directly or indirectly, he's the closest to the spirit of God that he ever found in a writer, right? And so it's just let's get in the book because it's so good. I came down here to the beach to show a beautiful sunset, and then the clouds are all out, but it's still a great view. I think I'll set you guys on the dash, just make sure, because there's just people out there picnicking, or else I'd go out there. Let's see. Usually, okay. Maybe you're facing me because I can't see what you're seeing. But it's so nice. All right, let's see. All right, we are on chapter 23. And it's called Dr. Kelman. Dr. Kelman is So I read fairy stories because they're transformative. They're like, this book alone is like 1,000 therapy sessions if you would just sit and be really present with it. I've been a psychologist for over 20 years now. And so I just have a high taste for good medicine, for real spiritual transformation, real psychological transformation. So I make this for kids and adults. I'm trying to... So, yeah, I'll just go into the story. I'll let the story speak for itself. Because we're meant to learn discernment. And you can't learn discernment on how things operate and how you ought to be, or how you gain wisdom and everything. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, know Him. Acknowledge. It means discern. So it's about learning a kind of discernment that you don't get from just being, just talking about it or reading about it. But when you read about it in a story, you can gain from the story. The story can keep reminding you. It can be like a seed that's in you, that you listen to this over and over again, and it reminds you the true high path, how to find it in the story of your own life. All right, that's enough talking. I don't want to be too much because some people are listening to the playlist, and I just want to go on with the book. Okay, I'm just going to hope that this is... Like, I don't know if I want to get out of the car and check the view. I can. All right. I'll just... Pardon standing up in my car. There, perfect view. Okay, I just don't know if... Anyway, there we go. Chapter 23. Dr. Kelman. As soon as he had reason to hope the way was clear, Curdie ventured softly into the hall, with Lena behind him. There was no one asleep on the bench or floor, but by the fading fire sat a girl weeping. It was the same who had seen him carrying off the food. She had been so hardly used, like hard, for saying so. She opened her eyes when he appeared, but did not seem frightened at him. So all the other pages and people like that beat her, and so she got in trouble for that. She was crying. I'll show you the picture. Hopefully you guys can see that. All right. I know why you weep, said Curdie, and I am sorry for you. It is hard not to be believed just because one speaks the truth, said the girl. But that seems reason enough with some people. My mother taught me to speak the truth and took such pains with me that I should find it hard to tell a lie. Though I could invent many a story these servants would believe at once. For the truth is a strange thing here, and they don't know it when they see it. Show it them, and they all stare as if it were a wicked lie. And that with the lie yet warm that has just left their own mouths. And that with the lie yet warm that has just left their own mouths. And so, she's saying that they want the lies too. All right. I'm going to go back this way for a second. You are a stranger, she said, and burst out weeping afresh. But the stranger you are to such a place and such people, the better. I am the person, said Curdie, whom you saw carrying the things from the supper table. He showed her the loaf. If you can trust as well as speak the truth, I will trust you. Can you trust me? She looked at him steadily for a moment. I can, she answered. One thing more, said Curdie. Have you courage as well as faith? I think so. Look my dog in the face and don't cry out. Come here, Lena. Lena obeyed. The girl looked at her and laid her hand on her head. Now I know you are a true woman, said Curdie. I am come to set things right in this house. Not one of the servants knows I am here. Will you tell them tomorrow morning that if they do not alter their ways and give over drinking and lying and stealing and unkindness, they shall every one of them be driven from the palace. They will not believe me, most likely, but you will give them the chance. I will. Then I will be your friend. Wait here till I come again. She looked at him once more in the face and sat down. When he reached the royal chamber, he found His Majesty awake and very anxiously expecting him. He received him with the utmost kindness, and at once, as it were, put himself in his hands by telling him all he knew concerning the state he was in. His voice was feeble, but his eye was clear, and although now and then his words and thoughts seemed to wander, Curdie could not be certain that the cause of their not being intelligible to him did not lie in himself. The king told him that for some years, ever since his queen's death, he had been losing heart over the wickedness of his people. He had tried hard to make them good, but they got worse and worse. Evil teachers, unknown to him, had crept into the schools. This was written in the 1800s, just FYI. There was a general decay of truth and right principle, at least in the city. And as that set the example to the nation, it must spread. The main cause of his illness was the despondency with which the degeneration of his people affected him. He could not sleep and had terrible dreams, while, to his unspeakable shame and distress, he doubted almost everybody. He had striven against his suspicion, but in vain, and his heart was sore, for his courtiers and counselors were really kind, only he could not think why none of their ladies came near his princess. The whole country was discontented, he heard, and there were signs of gathering storm outside as well as inside his borders. The master of the horse gave him sad news of the insubordination of the army, and his great white horse was dead, they told him, and his sword had lost its temper. It bent double the last time he tried it. Only perhaps that was in a dream. And they could not find his shield, and one of his spurs had lost the rowel, the round part. Thus the poor king went wandering in a maze of sorrows, some of which were purely imaginary, while others were truer than he understood. He told how thieves came at night and tried to take his crown, so that he never dared let it out of his hands, even when he slept, and how every night an evil demon in the shape of his physician came and poured poison down his throat. He knew it to be poison, he said, somehow, although it tasted like wine. Oh, the sun! I gotta show you. This is why it's important to look up. It's just going over the horizon. Here he stopped, faint with unusual exertion of talking. Curdie seized the flagon and ran to the wine cellar. I'm watching the sunset too. In the servants' hall, the girl still sat by the fire, waiting for him. As he returned, he told her to follow him, and left her at the chamber door till he should rejoin her. When the king had a little wine, he informed him that he had already discovered certain of his majesty's enemies, and one of the worst of them was the doctor, for it was no other demon than the doctor himself, who had been coming every night and giving him a slow poison. So, said the king, then I have not been suspicious enough, for I thought it was but a dream. Is it possible Kelman can be such a wretch? Who then am I to trust? Not one in the house except the princess and myself, said Curdie. I will not go to sleep, said the king. That would be as bad as taking the poison, said Curdie. No, no, sire, you must show your confidence by leaving all the watching to me and doing all the sleeping your majesty can, for healing. The king smiled a contented smile, turned on his side, and was presently fast asleep. Then Curdie persuaded the princess also to go to sleep, and telling Lena to watch, went to the housemaid. He asked her if she could inform him which of the council slept in the palace, and show him their rooms. She knew every one of them, she said, and took him the round all of their doors, telling him which slept in each room. He then dismissed her, and returning to the king's chamber, seated himself behind a curtain at the head of the bed, on the side farthest from the king. He told Lena to get under the bed and make no noise. About 1 o'clock, the doctor came stealing in. He looked round for the princess, and seeing no one, smiled with satisfaction as he approached the wine where it stood under the lamp. Having partly filled a glass, he took from his pocket a small vial, and filled up the glass from it. The light fell upon his face from above, and Curdie saw the snake in it plainly visible. He had never beheld such an evil countenance. The man hated the king and delighted in doing him wrong. With the glass in his hand, he drew near the bed, set it down, and began his usual rude rousing of his majesty, not at once succeeding. He took a lancet from his pocket and was parting its cover with an involuntary hiss of hate between his closed teeth, when Curdie stooped and whispered to Lena, "Take him by the leg, Lena." Oh, whispered, "Take him by the leg, Lena." She darted noiselessly upon him with a face of horrible consternation. He gave his leg one tug to free it. The next instant, Curdie heard the one scrunch with which she crushed the bone like a stick of celery. He tumbled on the floor with a yell. "Drag him out, Lena," said Curdie. It's still nice to see the ocean. I'm going to flip you around here. "Drag him out, Lena," said Curdie. Lena took him by the collar and dragged him out. Her master followed to direct her, and they left him lying across the Lord Chamberlain's door. There he gave another horrible yell and fainted. The king had waked at his first cry, and by the time Curdie re-entered he had got at his sword, where it hung from the center of the tester, and had drawn it and was trying to get out of bed. But when Curdie told him all was well, he lay down again as quietly as a child, comforted by his mother from a troubled dream. Curdie went to the door to watch. Here's the picture. All right. The doctor's yells had roused many, but not one had yet ventured to appear. Oh, I didn't mean to get them. This is one of my favorite places. I just don't know how to set up my camera because I'm reading the book right now. All right. You get me. Bells were rung violently, but none were answered, and in a minute or two, Curdie had what he was watching for. The door of the Lord Chamberlain's room opened, and pale with hideous terror, his lordship peeped out. Seeing no one, he advanced to step into the corridor and tumbled over the doctor. Curdie ran up and held out his hand. He received in it the claw of a bird of prey, vulture or eagle, he could not tell which. His lordship, as soon as he was on his legs, taking him for one of the pages, abused him heartily for not coming sooner, and threatened him with dismissal from the king's service for cowardice and neglect. He began, indeed, what bade fair to be a sermon on the duties of a page, but catching sight of the man who lay at his door, and seeing it was the doctor, he fell out upon Curdie afresh for standing there doing nothing, and ordered him to fetch immediate assistance. Curdie left him, but slipped into the king's chamber, closed and locked the door, and left the rascals to look out after each other. Ere long he heard hurrying footsteps, and for a few minutes there was a great muffled tumult of scuffling feet, low voices, and deep groanings. Then all was still again. Irene slept through the whole, so confidently did she rest, knowing Curdie was in her father's room, watching over him. Chapter 24. Curdie sat and watched every motion of the sleeping king all the night to his ear. The palace lay as quiet as a nursery of healthful children. At sunrise he called the princess. "How has his majesty slept?" were her first words as she entered the room. "Quite quietly," answered Curdie. "That is, since the doctor was got rid of." "How did you manage that?" inquired Irene. And Curdie had to tell all about it. "How terrible," she said. "Did it not startle the king dreadfully?" "It did rather. I found him getting out of his bed, sword in hand." "The brave old man," cried the princess. "Not so old," said Curdie, "as you will soon see." He went off again in a minute or so, but for a little while he was restless. And once, when he lifted his hand, it came down on the spikes of his crown, and he half waked. "But where is the crown?" cried Irene in sudden terror. "I stroked his hands," answered Curdie, "and took the crown from them, and ever since he has slept quietly, and again smiled in his sleep." "I have never seen him do that," said the princess. "But what have you done with the crown, Curdie?" Here's a picture. Let's see what it says. Lena guards the crown. We'll find out. "Look," said Curdie, moving away from the bedside. Irene followed him, and there in the middle of the floor she saw a strange sight. Lena lay at full length, fast asleep, her tail stretched out straight behind her, and her forelegs before her, between the two paws meeting in front of it. Her nose just touching it, and behind glowed and flashed the crown, like a nest for the hummingbirds of heaven. Irene gazed and looked up with a smile. "But what if the thief were to come, and she not to wake?" she said. "Shall I try her?" And as she spoke, she stooped towards the crown. "No, no, no," cried Curdie, terrified. "She would frighten you out of your wits. I would do it to show you, but she would wake your father. You have no conception with what a roar she would spring at my throat. But you shall see how lightly she wakes the moment I speak to her. Lena." She was on her feet the same instant, with her great tail sticking out straight behind her, just as it had been lying. "Good dog," said the princess, and patted her head. Lena wagged her tail solemnly, like the boom of an anchored sloop. Irene took the crown and laid it where the king would see it when he woke. "Now, princess," said Curdie, "I must leave you for a few minutes. You must bolt the door, please, and not open it to anyone." Away to the cellar he went, with Lena, taking care as they passed through the servants' hall to get her a good breakfast. In about 1 minute she had eaten what he gave her, and looked up in his face. It was not more she wanted, but work. So out of the cellar they went through the passage, and Curdie into the dungeon, where he pulled up Lena, opened the door, let her out, and shut it again behind her. As he reached the door of the king's chamber, Lena was flying out of the gate of Gwentystorm as fast as her mighty legs could carry her. "What's come to the wench?" growled the man-servants one to another, the men-servants, when the chambermaid appeared among them the next morning. There was something in her face which they could not understand, and they did not like. "Are we all dirt?" they said. "What are you thinking about? Have you seen yourself in the glass this morning, miss?" The mirror. She made no answer. "Do you want to be treated as you deserve, or will you speak, you hussy?" said the first woman cook. "I would fain know what right you have to put on a face like that." "You won't believe me," said the girl. "Of course not. What is it?" "I must tell you whether you believe me or not," said the girl. "Of course you must." "It is this, then. If you do not repent of your bad ways, you are all going to be punished, all turned out of the palace together." "A mighty punishment," said the butler. "A good riddance, say I, of the trouble of keeping minxes like you in order. And why, pray, should we be turned out? What have I to repent of now, your holiness?" "That you know best yourself," said the girl. "A pretty piece of insolence! How should I know, forsooth, what a menial like you has got against me? There are people in this house. Oh, I'm not blind to their ways, but everyone for himself, say I. Pray, misjudgment, who gave you such an impertinent message to His Majesty's household?" "One who has come to set things right in the king's house." "Right indeed," cried the butler. But that moment the thought came back to him of the roar he had heard in the cellar, and he turned pale and was silent. The steward looked up next. "I pray, pretty prophetess," he said, attempting to chuck her under the chin. "What have I got to repent of?" "That you know best yourself," said the girl. "You have but to look into your books, or your heart." "Can you tell me, then, what I have to repent of?" said the groom of the chambers. "That you know best yourself." said the girl once more. "The person who told me to tell you said the servants of the house had to repent of thieving and lying and unkindness and drinking, and they will be made to repent of them one way if they do not do it of themselves of another. Do it of themselves another, do this of yourself." Then arose a great hubbub, for by this time all the servants in the house were gathered about her, and all talked together in towering indignation. "Thieving, indeed," cried one. "A pretty word in a house where everything is left lying about in a shameless way, tempting poor innocent girls, a house where nobody cares for anything, or has the least respect to the value of property." "I suppose you envy me this brooch of mine," said another. "There was just a half sheet of note-paper about it, not a scrap more, in a drawer. That's always open in the writing table. In the study. What sort of place is that for a jewel? Can you call it stealing to take a thing from such a place as that? Nobody cared a straw about it. It might as well have been in the dust-hole. If it had been locked up, then, to be sure." "Drinking," said the chief porter with a husky laugh. "And who wouldn't drink when he had a chance? Or who would repent it, except that the drink was gone? Tell me that, Miss Innocence." "Lying," said a great coarse footman. "I suppose you mean, when I told you yesterday you were a pretty girl, when you didn't pout. Lying, indeed. Tell us something worth repenting of. Lying is the way of Gwentistorm. You should have heard Jabez lying to the cook last night. He wanted a sweetbread for his pup, and pretended it was for the princess. Ha, ha, ha. Unkindness, I wonder who's unkind, going and listening to any stranger against her fellow servants, and then bringing back his wicked words to trouble them," said the oldest and worst of the housemaids. "One of ourselves, too. Come, you hypocrite, this is all an invention of yours and your young man's to take your revenge on us because we found you out in the lie last night. Tell true news." Oh, here's the picture. "Wasn't it the same that stole the loaf and the pie that sent you with the impudent message?" And she said this. As she said this, she stepped up to the housemaid and gave her, instead of time to answer, a box on the ear that almost threw her down. And whoever could get at her began to push and hustle and pinch and punch her. "You invite your fate." "You invite your fate," she said quietly. They fell furiously upon her and drove her from the hall with kicks and blows, hustled her along the passage, and threw her down the stair to the wine cellar, then locked the door at the top of it and went back to their breakfast. In the meantime, the king and the princess had had their bread and wine, and the princess, with Curdie's help, had made the room as tidy as she could. They were terribly neglected by the servants, and now Curdie set himself to interest and amuse the king, and prevent him from thinking too much, in order that he might the sooner think the better. Presently, at his Majesty's request, he began from the beginning, and told everything he could recall of his life, about his father and mother and their cottage on the mountain, of the inside of the mountain and the work there, about the goblins and his adventures with them. Wait, when did Curdie get back into the room? Maybe this was earlier. When he came to finding the princess and her nurse overtaken by the twilight on the mountain, Irene took up her share of the tale and told all about herself to that point, and then Curdie took it up again, and so They went on, each fitting in the part that the other did not know, thus keeping the hoop of the story running straight, and the king listened with wondering and delighted ears, astonished to find what he could so ill comprehend, yet fitting so well together from the lips of the two narrators. At last, with the mission given him by the wonderful princess and his consequent adventures, Curdie brought up the whole tale of the present moment. Then a silence fell, and Irene and Curdie thought the king was asleep, but he was far from it. He was thinking about many things. After a long pause, he said, "Now at last, my children, I am compelled to believe many things I could not and do not yet understand, things I used to hear and sometimes see as often as I visited my mother's home. Once, for instance, I heard my mother say to her father, speaking of me, 'He is a good, honest boy, but he will be an old man before he understands,' said my grandfather answered, right? 'Keep up your heart, child. My mother will look after him.' I often thought of their words, and the many strange things besides I both heard and saw in that house, but by degrees, because I could not understand them, I gave up thinking of them, and indeed I had almost forgotten them when you, my child, talking that day about the Queen Irene and her pigeons, and what you had seen in her... Right, many strange things besides I had both heard and saw in that house, but by degrees, because I could not understand them, I gave up thinking of them, and indeed I had almost forgotten them. When you, my child, talking that day about the Queen Irene and her pigeons, and what you had seen in her garret, brought them all back to my mind in a vague mass. But now they keep coming back to me one by one, every one for itself, and I shall just hold my peace and lie here quite still and think about them all till I get well again.'" That's the best, you know. All these ways that you've been helped, but your mind can't understand them, you know. It's my chair. All right. What he meant they could not quite understand, but they saw plainly that already he was better. "Put away my crown," he said. "I am tired of seeing it, and I have no more any fear of its safety." They put it away together, withdrew from the bedside, and left him in peace. You know, people can hold on to a crown, but what he was missing was his crown, you know, his kingship. He wasn't exercising it. Anyway. Okay, chapter 25, The Avengers. I wonder if they got it from here. This is 1883 originally published. There was nothing now to be dreaded from Dr. Kelman, but it made Curdie anxious as the evening drew near to think that not a soul belonging to the court had been to visit the king or ask how he did that day. He feared in some shape or other a more determined assault. He had provided himself a place in the room to which he might retreat upon approach, and whence he could watch. But not once had he had to betake himself to it. Towards night the king fell asleep. Curdie thought more and more uneasily of the moment when he must again leave them for a little while. Deeper and deeper fell the shadows. No one came to light the lamp. The princess drew her chair close to Curdie. She would rather it were not so dark, she said. She was afraid of something. She could not tell what. So they could both feel it, you know. Nor could she give any reason for her fear, but that all was so dreadfully still. When it had been dark about an hour, Curdie thought Lena might be returned. So I guess Lena had been the one that left. And reflected that the sooner he went, the less danger was there of any assault while he was away. There was more risk of his own presence being discovered, no doubt, but things were now drawing to a crisis, and it must be run. You know, they must run the crisis. So telling the princess to lock all the doors of the bedchamber and let no one in, he took his mattock, and with here a run and there a halt, under cover, gained the door at the head of the cellar stair in safety. To his surprise, he found it locked, and the key was gone. There was no time for deliberation. He felt where the lock was, and dealt it a tremendous blow with his mattock. It needed but a second to dash the door open. Someone laid a hand on his arm. "Who is it?" said Curdie. "I told you they wouldn't believe me, sir," said the housemaid. "I have been here all day." He took her hand and said, "You are a good, brave girl. Now come with me, lest your enemies imprison you again." He took her to the cellar, locked the door, lighted a bit of candle, gave her a little wine, told her to wait there till he came, and went out the back way. Swiftly he swung himself up into the dungeon. Lena had done her part. The place was swarming with creatures, animal forms, wilder and more grotesque than ever ramped in a nightmare dream. Close by the hole, waiting his coming, her green eyes piercing the gulf below, Lena had but just laid herself down when he appeared. All about the vault and up the slope of the rubbish heap lay and stood and squatted the 49 whose friendship Lena had conquered in the wood. They all came crowding about Curdie. He must get them into the cellar as quickly as ever he could, but when he looked at the size of some of them, he feared it would be a long business to enlarge the hole sufficiently to let them through. At it he rushed, hitting vigorously at its edge with the mattock. At the very first blow came a splash from the water beneath, but ere he could heave a third, a creature like a tapir, only that the grasping point of its proboscis was hard at the steel of Curdie's hammer, pushed him gently aside, making room for another creature with a head like a great club. With it, began banging upon the floor with terrible force and noise. After about a minute of this battery, the tapir came up again, shoved Clubhead aside, and putting its own head into the hole, began gnawing at the sides of it with the finger of its nose, in such a fashion that the fragments fell in a continuous gravelly shower into the water. In a few minutes, the opening was large enough for the biggest creature amongst them to get through it. Next came the difficulty of letting them down. Some were quite light, but the half of them were too heavy for the rope, not to say for his arms. The creatures themselves seemed to be puzzling where or how they were to go. One after another of them came up, looked down through the hole, and drew back. Curdie thought if he let Lena down, perhaps they would suggest something. Possibly they did not see the opening on the other side. He did so, and Lena stood lighting up the entrance of the passage with her gleaming eyes. One by one the creatures looked down again, and one by one they drew back, each standing aside to glance at the next, as if to say, "Now you have a look." And at last it came to the turn to the serpent with the long body, the 4 short legs behind him, and the little wings before. No sooner had he poked his head through than he poked it farther through, and farther yet, until there was little more than his legs left in the dungeon. But by that time he had got his head and neck well into the passage beside Lena. Then his legs gave a great waddle and spring, and he tumbled himself, far as there was betwixt them, heels over head, into the passage. "Well, that's all very well for you, Mr. Leg Serpent," thought Curdie to himself, "but what is to be done with the rest?" He had hardly time to think it, however, before the creature's head appeared again through the floor. He caught hold of the bar of iron to which Curdie's rope was tied, and settling it securely across the narrowest part of the irregular opening, held fast to it with his teeth. It was plain to Curdie, from the universal hardness amongst them, that they must all, at one time or another, have been creatures of the mines. He saw at once what this one was after. He had planted his feet firmly upon the floor of the passage, and stretched his long body up and across the chasm to serve as a bridge for the rest. He mounted instantly upon his neck, threw his arms around him as far as they would go, and slid down in ease and safety, the bridge just bending a little as his weight glided over it. But he thought some of the creatures would try his teeth. One by one of the oddities followed and slid down in safety. When they seemed to be all landed, he counted them up. There was but 48. Up the rope again he went, and found one which had been afraid to trust himself to the bridge, and no wonder, for he had neither legs, nor head, nor arms, nor tail, and was just a round thing, about a foot in diameter, with a nose and a mouth and eyes on one side of the ball. He had made his journey by rolling as swiftly as the fleetest of them could run, the back leg of the leg serpent not being flat. He could not quite trust himself to roll straight and not drop into the gulf. Curdie took him in his arms, and the moment he looked down through the hole, the bridge made itself again, and he slid into the passage in safety, with Ball Body in his bosom. I'll show you the picture. He ran first to the cellar to warn the girl not to be frightened at the avengers of wickedness. Then he called to Lena to bring in her friends. One after another they came trooping in, till the cellar seemed full of them. The housemaid regarded them without fear. "Sir," she said, "there is one of the pages I don't take to be a bad fellow." "Then keep him near you," said Curdie. "And now, can you show me a way to the king's chamber, not through the servants' hall?" "There is a way through the chamber of the colonel of the guard," she answered, "but he is ill and in bed." "Take me that way," said Curdie. By many ups and downs and windings and turnings she brought him to a dimly lighted room, where lay an elderly man asleep. His arm was outside the coverlid, and Curdie gave his hand a hurried grasp as he went by. His heart beat for joy, for he had found a good honest hand, it says. "I suppose that is why he is ill," he said to himself. It was now close upon supper time, and when the girl stopped at the door of the king's chamber, he told her to go and give the servants one warning more. "Say the messenger sent you," he said. "I will be with you very soon." The king was still asleep. Curdie talked to the princess for a few minutes, told her not to be frightened whatever noises she heard, only to keep her door locked till he came and left her. The next is chapter 26, The Vengeance. I'll show you the picture, but I gotta quit now because I leave these about 45 minutes, except for the one I had to do for 30. All right, much love. Share and comment and watch these all the way through and like them and all of that stuff. It really helps the algorithms of my channel so this stuff gets out to more people. I really appreciate it. Thank you.